This is Wild West Romance, the home of untold stories, burning passions, and legendary love beneath the desert sun. Saddle up, partner, because today's story will take you deep into the heart of the frontier, where fate is written in dust, and love is forged in fire. Tonight's tale is titled, If You Hit All These Bottles, You Will Win an Apache Girl. The cowboy accepted the challenge, and everything changed forever. Before we ride into this powerful Wild West love story, don't forget to subscribe to Wild West Romance, hit that bell icon, and join our growing family of Western hearts and storytellers. Every week, we bring you real emotion, fierce honor, and the kind of love only the frontier could create. The sun hung low over Red Mesa, casting long golden shadows across the dusty main street of the frontier town. The wind carried the faint creak of saloon doors and the smell of whiskey, gunpowder, and desert sage. It was a Saturday evening, and half the town had gathered in front of the Silver Spur Saloon, the kind of place where fortunes were made, lives were lost, and legends were born. Among the crowd stood a man known simply as Cole Danner, a cowboy whose name had begun to travel from one end of the Arizona Territory to the other. Tall, lean, and quiet as a coyote, Cole had spent years working cattle and riding trails no man dared cross. But tonight wasn't about work or cattle. Tonight was about pride, and a challenge no one had ever dared to accept before. Inside the saloon, the laughter was loud, the poker tables full, and the whiskey cheap. But the real entertainment was outside. 6 glass bottles perched neatly on a wooden rail, gleaming under the dying sun. The challenge was simple, or so it seemed. If you hit all these bottles, you'll win an Apache Girl. The words had been spoken by Harlan Briggs, a wealthy rancher and gambler with more arrogance than sense. He'd returned from the frontier borderlands with a young Apache woman he claimed to have won in a card game with outlaws. Her name, he said, was Nayeli, though few believed that was the name she'd been born with. She stood silently beside the corral fence, her wrists bound, her dark eyes burning with quiet fury and humiliation. Most men in town knew better than to take part in Briggs' twisted game. The Apaches were feared and respected, not because of superstition, but because they fought for their own, with a ferocity that even the U.S. cavalry couldn't match. But Harlan Briggs had no fear, and his cruelty was the talk of every saloon. Cole Danner hadn't planned on getting involved. He'd come to Red Mesa to rest his horse and get a decent meal. But when he saw Nayeli standing there, proud even in chains, something deep inside him stirred. Maybe it was guilt, maybe it was anger, or maybe it was that old sense of justice that never quite died in men like him. The crowd jeered and laughed as Harlan strutted before the bottles, waving a silver revolver in one hand. "No man's ever hit all 6, he bragged, "and no man ever will." Cole watched from the edge of the crowd, his hat low over his eyes. 6 bottles, 6 shots. He could do it. He knew he could, but it wasn't about the bottles anymore. It was about what that challenge represented, the mockery of a human being, the arrogance of power, and the cruelty of men who thought the world belonged to them. The saloon owner, an old man named Greeley, noticed the cowboy watching. "Don't get yourself tangled in that mess, son," he muttered. "Ain't worth it. That Apache girl's cursed, they say. Bad luck follows her kind." Cole didn't answer. He stepped forward slowly, boots crunching on the dust. The crowd turned, murmuring as he approached the shooting rail. "I'll take the challenge," he said quietly, his voice calm but cold as steel. Harlan Briggs grinned, surprised and amused. "You?" he said, his laugh echoing across the square. "What's your name, cowboy?" Cole didn't reply. He simply nodded toward the bottles. "Let's get this over with." The crowd grew silent as Cole reached for his revolver, a Colt Peacemaker worn smooth from years of use. He rolled the cylinder once, checked the rounds, and took a slow breath. The wind had died. Even the horses seemed to sense what was coming. 6 bottles, 6 chances, 1 life hanging in the balance. Cole lifted the gun. His hand didn't shake. The first shot rang out, a sharp crack that shattered the stillness. The first bottle exploded into shards of light. The crowd gasped. The second shot, another bottle gone. The third, another clean hit. By the fourth, murmurs began to spread through the onlookers. "Ain't nobody done that before," someone whispered. The 5th bottle burst into dust. Only 1 remained. Cole paused, lowering the barrel just slightly. The sun was almost gone now, and the air was heavy. Nayeli's eyes met his across the distance. Not with gratitude, not yet, but with something fierce and ancient. A silent warning. Cole aimed. The last bottle caught the dying sunlight, glowing amber. He squeezed the trigger. The explosion of glass was followed by silence. A silence so deep it seemed to swallow the whole town. Then the crowd erupted. Cheers, whistles, disbelief. Cole Danner had done the impossible. Harlan Briggs' grin faltered, his face twisting with anger. "Well, I'll be damned," he muttered. "You got yourself a prize, cowboy." Cole holstered his gun. "Untie her," he said. Harlan hesitated. "Now hold on." Cole's hand dropped back to the revolver, and for a moment, something in his eyes made even Briggs step back. "Untie her," Cole repeated, his tone leaving no room for argument. The ropes came off. Nayeli rubbed her wrists, her gaze never leaving Cole's face. There was no smile, no thanks, only confusion and pride. As the crowd began to disperse, Cole turned to leave. He didn't know what to say or what came next. He only knew he couldn't let her stay in this place. But before he could take a step, a distant sound rolled across the desert, a low, rhythmic drumbeat echoing from the mesas beyond. The townsfolk froze, their faces turning pale. It was the Apache war drums, and they were getting closer. The drums rolled through the valley like thunder, deep and measured, the sound of vengeance carried on the wind. The people of Red Mesa scattered into doorways and alleys, their laughter dying in their throats. To them, those drums meant only one thing. The Apache were coming. Cole Danner stood still, his hand resting near his holster, eyes fixed on the horizon where the sun was sinking into the desert. He had seen war parties before. He knew that sound. It wasn't the chaos of a raid, it was the rhythm of a people announcing their return. The earth seemed to hum with it, low and steady, like the heartbeat of something vast and ancient. Behind him, Nayeli stood silent. Her dark hair fell loose over her shoulders, and the marks from the rope were still red on her wrists, yet her eyes had changed. In that moment, Cole saw no fear in her, only recognition. The sound of those drums wasn't a warning to her, it was a call. The people of Red Mesa shouted and ran for cover, slamming shutters, locking doors, and dousing lamps. Harlan Briggs barked orders to his men, his voice rising with panic. He hadn't expected this. He thought the Apache had long given up on reclaiming their own. But he had been wrong. Cole turned and found Nayeli watching the mesa ridge. The drums grew louder. Somewhere out there her people were closing in. And when they came, they would show no mercy. Not to the men who had chained her, and not to the town that had stood by and watched. He knew what would happen next. He'd seen it before. There would be fire, blood, and the stench of burning wood. And if the Apaches saw him standing among the white men, they'd cut him down without hesitation. There was only one choice. Get her out before the fight began. Cole led his horse from the hitching post. The animal snorted nervously, sensing the tension in the air. The street was nearly empty now, save for the few drunks who were too slow or too foolish to hide. Cole lifted a saddlebag onto the horse's flank, his mind racing through the terrain that stretched beyond the town. The canyon trails, the dry riverbeds, the hidden paths through the rocks where a man could vanish if he knew where to look. He motioned for Nayeli to follow. She hesitated for a moment, glancing toward the mesas. The drums had changed. Faster now, closer. Her people were near enough to see the dust rising from the town. Cole didn't know if she would come with him or run toward them. But then, something shifted in her face. She stepped forward, slow but sure, and mounted the horse behind him. The decision was made. The wind picked up, carrying the scent of rain and smoke. Cole spurred the horse, and together they rode out of Red Mesa, past the silent saloon and the abandoned wagons, down the trail that cut between the red cliffs. Behind them, faint screams began to echo through the night. They didn't look back. The canyon opened before them like a wound in the earth, a labyrinth of shadows and stone. The moonlight barely reached the bottom, and the air grew cooler, damp with the smell of sage and sand. Every sound echoed, the horse's hooves, the whisper of fabric, the soft breath of two souls caught between two worlds. Nayeli sat still, her hands gripping the saddle, her eyes scanning the dark cliffs. She knew this land better than anyone alive. Her ancestors had walked these canyons before the first settler had ever seen the desert. She could feel where the walls narrowed, where the streams once ran, and where the hidden caves offered safety. Cole could sense it too. Though she hadn't spoken a word, her movements guided him. A subtle shift of weight here, a gentle pull on the reins there. It was as if the desert itself was speaking through her. As the night deepened, they reached the bend of the canyon where the trail split in two. One path led north toward the dry plains and the cavalry outpost. Safety, perhaps, but also questions and chains for Nayeli. The other led south into the deeper wilderness, into Apache land, where no white man had ever been welcomed. Cole slowed the horse. He could feel her eyes on him. He knew that whatever happened next would define both their fates. He turned south. The canyon walls glowed faintly under the moon, their red stone reflecting silver light. Coyotes howled in the distance, and the sound seemed to echo endlessly through the rocks. Cole felt a strange calm settle over him, the kind that came only when a man crossed a line he could never return from. They rode for hours without speaking, though words were no longer needed. The bond between them was silent but alive, born of danger, of the strange trust that forms when two people run from death together. By dawn, they reached the mouth of a narrow ravine where a stream trickled between stones. Cole dismounted, letting the horse drink. The desert stretched endlessly beyond, harsh, magnificent, alive. He felt the exhaustion in his bones but didn't stop to rest. He knew the Apache would track them, and the cavalry would ride out from Red Mesa before the day was done. They were caught between two forces, and neither offered mercy. Nayeli walked to the edge of the ravine, kneeling beside the water. The light of morning touched her face, revealing the quiet strength there, a strength that came not from defiance but from endurance. She touched the water with her fingers, then looked toward the distant cliffs. Cole watched her, unsure of what she was thinking, unsure of what he was becoming. Somewhere in his chest a realization began to grow, that what he'd done in Red Mesa wasn't just a rescue, it was the start of something far more dangerous. The desert was awakening now, the sun rising over the ridges, casting gold over the canyon floor. Cole knew they couldn't stay long. The Apache scouts would be near by midday. He saddled the horse again, scanning the horizon. He didn't know where they were headed, only that they had to keep moving. But before they left, Nayeli turned and met his gaze for the first time since they'd fled the town. In her eyes, there was no gratitude, only a fierce, searching light, as if she were trying to understand. The man who had risked everything to save her. The sound of distant hoofbeats reached them. Faint but real, someone was following. The chase had begun, and deep within the canyon, the echoes of those pursuing riders promised that the story of Cole Danner and the Apache Girl had only just begun. The morning sun rose hard and blinding over the canyon, turning the world into a furnace of red and gold. The air shimmered with heat before noon, and the desert seemed to stretch on forever. Endless dunes, whispering sagebrush, and the lonely cry of hawks circling above. Cole Danner rode at a steady pace, his horse breathing heavy, hooves crunching over rock and sand. Behind him, Nayeli sat silent as ever, her gaze fixed on the horizon. Neither had spoken since they left the ravine. There was no need. Every sound, every gust of wind, every shadow cast across the trail said what words could not, that they were being followed. Far behind, faint dust trails rose against the sky. Riders. Whether they were Harlan Briggs's men or Apache scouts, Cole couldn't tell. Both had reason to come after them. One sought vengeance for humiliation, the other for justice. In either case, death was certain if they were caught. The desert showed no mercy. Every step forward drained strength, every breath burned the lungs. The sun turned skin raw and lips cracked. Cole knew they had to find shade and water soon, or the desert itself would finish what their pursuers had started. By midday they reached a wide basin surrounded by low cliffs. Dry riverbeds wound through it like veins, and the faint remains of an old wagon trail cut across the sand. It was a lonely, haunted place, the kind that whispered of old tragedies and forgotten graves. Cole dismounted, scanning the horizon with a hunter's eyes. The dust plumes behind them were closer now. They found a patch of shade beneath a rock overhang, and Cole led the horse there, giving it the last of their water. The animal drank greedily, nostrils flaring. Nayeli crouched nearby, watching the horizon. Her expression was unreadable, calm, almost detached, yet Cole could feel her mind working, calculating distances, remembering paths known only to her people. She rose suddenly and moved toward the cliffs, her bare feet silent on the sand. Cole followed her at a distance. She stopped at a narrow crevice, barely wide enough for a man to squeeze through, hidden behind a curtain of dry brush. Without hesitation, she stepped into the darkness. Inside the crevice, the air was cool. It led to a small hollow carved by centuries of wind, hidden completely from the open desert. There, in the shadowed rock, lay a shallow pool of clear water, fed by an underground spring that had defied the desert's thirst. It was a secret sanctuary. Cole filled the canteen and let the horse drink again. For a brief moment there was peace. The sound of dripping water echoed softly against the stone. Nayeli sat near the pool, her hands cupped, her reflection shimmering in the surface. She looked smaller there, more human than the fierce spirit she had seen before, yet even in that stillness, there was strength, not the kind that shouted, but the kind that endured. Cole watched her and wondered what fate had brought him to this point. A drifter, a man who'd spent his life running from everything, now risking it all for someone he didn't even understand. Maybe it was guilt, maybe it was redemption, or maybe it was something else entirely, something that had nothing to do with logic or law. But the peace didn't last. A hawk screamed overhead. The echo carried through the canyon like a warning. Cole stepped out of the crevice and climbed the rocks to get a better view. Dust again, this time closer, sharper. He could make out horsemen, now maybe half a dozen, riding hard across the basin. They were Harlan Briggs's men. The glint of rifles caught the light, and at their head rode Briggs himself, his pride wounded, his rage unchained. Cole knew they wouldn't stop. They would take Nayeli back, and they would kill him slow for the insult. He moved quickly, loading his revolver, checking the rifle strapped to the saddle. Nayeli emerged from the shadows, already aware. Her eyes met his, not in fear, but in understanding. She reached for the horse's reins, and in that brief exchange, no words were needed. They rode out just as the riders entered the basin. The chase began again, dust rising, hooves pounding, bullets cracking through the hot air. Cole urged the horse faster, weaving between the rocks. The echoes of gunfire bounced off the cliffs, each shot coming closer. The desert exploded around them. Sand kicked up, stone shattered, and the world turned into a blur of sound and motion. Cole fired back once, just enough to slow them, but he knew they couldn't fight. Not out here, not against numbers. They had to reach the canyons beyond the basin, where the land grew jagged and narrow, where a single rider could vanish among the stones. The horse stumbled once, catching a hoof on a rock, but pushed on. Nayeli held tight, her hair whipping in the wind. Cole could feel the animal's heart racing beneath him, feel his own pulse pounding in his throat. Then, as they neared the far ridge, Nayeli suddenly pointed toward a gap between two cliffs, invisible to most eyes, just a shadow in the rock. Cole turned the horse sharply, plunging into it. The world narrowed to a winding path barely wide enough for a man. Behind them, the riders followed, shouting, cursing, firing wildly. One man's horse slipped on the rocks and fell, tumbling into the ravine. The others slowed, uncertain. The canyon twisted and turned like a serpent, swallowing Cole and Nayeli whole. When the sound of pursuit finally faded, Cole stopped. The horse was trembling, foam on its flanks, but alive. He dismounted, listening. Only the whisper of wind answered. They were safe, for now Nayeli moved ahead, her figure framed by the pale light filtering through cracks in the stone. The path beyond led deeper into the wilderness, Apache territory. Cole hesitated. He knew what crossing that line meant. But there was no turning back. As night fell, they found shelter in a small cave overlooking the valley below. The desert stretched endlessly, glowing under the moonlight. Cole built a small fire with dry brush, careful to keep it low. Nayeli sat beside the flames, her face lit in gold and shadow. For the first time she looked not like a captive or a fugitive, but something else, a bridge between two worlds that had never understood each other. Cole stared into the fire, thinking of the men who had chased them, of the war drums that still echoed somewhere in the distance, and of the uncertain road that lay ahead. He didn't know where this would end, whether in blood or in peace. But he knew that everything had changed the moment he pulled the trigger back in Red Mesa. The desert was quiet now, but in that silence he could feel it, the storm still coming, the reckoning that neither he nor she could escape. The wind carried a faint sound from far away, a single drumbeat, slow and steady. The Apache were close, and the next dawn would decide everything. The dawn broke over the desert like a blade of fire, slicing through the night's cold silence. The air was dry and still, carrying only the faint whisper of wind through the canyons. Cole Danner awoke to the pale light spilling across the cave floor, the embers of last night's fire still glowing faintly beside him. Nayeli was already awake, standing near the mouth of the cave, her silhouette framed against the rising sun. The world below stretched wide and endless, a maze of red stone, shadowed ridges, and dry riverbeds that shimmered like silver snakes in the light. Somewhere out there, the Apache drums were calling again, low, steady, ancient, the same rhythm that had haunted the edge of every dream since the night they'd fled. Red Mesa. Cole rose slowly, his body aching from the long ride and the tension of the chase. The horse grazed quietly near the entrance, its sides scarred with dust and sweat. He poured the last of the water into a tin cup, saving half for Nayeli. Neither of them spoke, but the silence between them had changed. It wasn't distance anymore. It was something else, a shared understanding born from survival. They had escaped Briggs and his men for now, but the desert held no mercy. The sun would burn hot soon, and without water, even the strongest rider would fall. Cole knew they needed to move, and to find shade, or a village, or anyone who could lead them through this harsh land. By mid-morning they began their descent from the high cliffs. The horses' hooves echoed softly against the stone as they followed a narrow trail downward. The canyon walls rose on either side, towering like cathedrals, painted with centuries of red dust and forgotten stories. It was a place untouched by law or time, sacred, dangerous, alive. The deeper they went, the stronger the sound of the drums became. It was no longer distant. It was near, pulsing through the air, steady as a heartbeat. Cole felt it in his chest. Each beat seemed to throb with intent. Not the wild call of war, but something older, like a ceremony, a gathering of spirits. They came to a plateau that overlooked a hidden valley below. There, among the brush and stones, smoke rose from small fires. Shapes moved between them. Apache riders, their horses decorated with feathers and paint, their movements calm and deliberate. Cole froze, his instincts sharp. He knew they were being watched. A figure emerged from the shadows of the rocks above them. Then another, silent riders, faces marked with ash, bows drawn but not loosed. The air grew thick with tension. Cole's hand brushed the grip of his revolver, but he didn't draw. He knew better than to challenge warriors on their own ground. Nayeli stepped forward. Her posture changed, no longer wary, but strong, rooted. Her presence seemed to shift the air around her. She raised one hand slowly, palm open, and began to walk toward the riders. The drums below quieted. The echoes of the canyon seemed to hold their breath. From the valley, a tall figure appeared, a man older than most, with braids streaked in silver and a face carved by years of wind and sun. He rode forward slowly, his gaze fixed on Nayeli. The warriors around them lowered their weapons slightly, murmuring among themselves. Cole stayed still, his pulse steady. He could see the recognition in the old man's eyes, the disbelief, the relief, and the sorrow. Nayeli had returned home. The old warrior dismounted, touching the ground before her, bowing his head in respect. The others followed. The sound of soft chanting began to rise from below, a melody that echoed against the stone, ancient and haunting. Cole stood apart, feeling like an intruder in a sacred moment. He didn't understand the words, but he didn't need to. He understood what was happening. The girl he had freed was no longer just a girl. She was something much more. As the chanting faded, Nayeli turned and looked back at him. Her eyes were different now, still fierce, but filled with something he hadn't seen before. There was gratitude, yes, but also conflict, the kind that came when two worlds collided and neither could survive unchanged. The old man motioned for Cole to come forward. He hesitated but obeyed, leading his horse slowly down the slope. The Apache watched him with eyes that were unreadable, neither hostile nor kind, just aware. They brought him into the valley, where the fires burned low and the smell of smoke mixed with the scent of sage. Women tended to cooking pots, children stared from behind hides, and men stood tall, their faces painted with solemn pride. Cole felt the weight of their gazes, of history pressing down on him. He was deep in their land now, beyond law, beyond the world he knew. That night they gave him food and water, but no words. The drums started again, slow and steady. The fire cast long shadows across the circle where the tribe gathered. Cole sat apart, listening, watching as the people danced, their movements graceful and mournful like ghosts speaking to the stars. Nayeli was among them. She moved with a rhythm that seemed to belong to the earth itself. The flames caught her face, her eyes reflecting the light like molten gold. Cole realized then that he hadn't just freed her from a man's cruelty. He had set loose a spirit that belonged to the wild, untamed heart of the land. But even as the fire burned bright, Cole could feel the darkness gathering beyond the valley. Somewhere out there, Harlan Briggs still lived, and men like him didn't forgive humiliation. They returned, crueler and angrier, until blood paid for pride. Cole knew Briggs would come, not just for revenge but to claim what he believed was his, and when he came, the Apache would fight. The night deepened, and the drums grew louder, echoing through the desert, rising and falling like thunder. Cole sat in silence, his hand resting on the worn handle of his revolver. The war that was coming would not be between two men, but two worlds. As the fire died down and the stars filled the sky, Nayeli turned her gaze toward the horizon, the same horizon where, even now, a faint dust cloud was beginning to form. The riders were coming. The night had surrendered to a pale gray stillness, the kind that comes before the first light touches the desert floor. The Apache Valley lay in uneasy silence. Every fire burned low, every shadow waiting. The wind whispered through the canyons, carrying the smell of dust, gun oil, and distant smoke. Something was coming, something that neither man nor spirit could stop. Cole Danner sat alone near the edge of the camp, his rifle laid across his knees, his hat pulled low to shield his eyes from the growing dawn. He hadn't slept. The memories of Red Mesa haunted him. The bottles, the crowd, the gunshots, the girls' bound wrists, and the drums that had followed. He had never meant for it to go this far. Yet now the price of that single decision hung heavy in the air. Below, the Apache warriors prepared in silence. They moved with calm precision, painting their faces, checking their arrows, and tying talismans of bone and feather to their weapons. No one spoke. Each man seemed to carry his purpose like a sacred burden. The women gathered the children and elders, leading them deep into the caves behind the valley. The old chief, Nayeli's father, stood at the center, watching the horizon. His eyes were hard and knowing. Nayeli herself was there beside him, her dark hair braided with eagle feathers, her face marked with streaks of white clay. The timid captive Cole had freed from Red Mesa was gone. In her place stood a leader, proud, calm, and burning with quiet strength. As the first rays of sun crept over the cliffs, the valley began to glow with amber light. Then came the sound, faint at first, then clearer, the steady beat of hooves, rolling across the plains like thunder. Harlan Briggs had come. He rode at the head of nearly 20 men, all armed and grim, their rifles glinting in the new light. Their horses kicked up plumes of dust that rose like ghosts. Briggs's face was pale and twisted with fury, the smug arrogance long gone, replaced by hatred. To him, this wasn't a rescue or revenge. It was conquest. He had been made a fool once, and now he would bury that shame under the blood of those who defied him. Cole watched from the ridge as the riders spread out in a half-circle, surrounding the valley entrance. He could see the rifles gleaming, the smoke of lit fuses curling from the dynamite packs. Some carried. Briggs was ready to burn the whole canyon if that's what it took. The Apache warriors waited. There were no shouts, no battle cries, only stillness, like the calm breath before a storm. Cole knew they would not attack first. This was their land, their home. They would defend it, not provoke. He turned his eyes to Nayeli, who stood motionless at her father's side. The chief raised one hand slowly, a signal. The warriors melted into the rocks and brush, vanishing like shadows. The valley seemed empty again. Only Cole and Nayeli remained visible, standing by the cliffs as the riders approached. The first gunshot broke the silence. A single crack that echoed through the canyon. Then another and another. Dust exploded from the stones near Cole's boots. Briggs' men had opened fire. The Apache answered like lightning. From the ridges and crevices came the hiss of arrows, the sharp crack of rifles, the sudden chaos of war. Horses reared, men shouted, and the desert erupted in noise and fury. The valley that had been silent moments ago was now alive with death. Cole fired once, dropping a man who had tried to flank the ridge. He reloaded, his movements steady, trained by years of survival. He wasn't fighting for glory or vengeance. He was fighting because there was no other choice. The air filled with smoke. The sound of war drums began again, not as warning now but as rhythm. Deep, unyielding, it carried through the canyon, guiding the warriors like a heartbeat of the land itself. Briggs's men pressed forward, yelling as they rode into the valley mouth. Dynamite exploded near the entrance, sending rocks raining down. But the Apache knew their land. They moved unseen, striking fast, then disappearing. The white riders fell one by one, swallowed by shadows. Through the chaos, Briggs himself charged forward, firing wildly, his voice hoarse with rage. He saw Cole across the valley and spurred his horse toward him. The two men locked eyes, predator and prey, though which was which, neither could say any more. Briggs raised his rifle. Cole ducked behind a boulder as bullets chipped the stone above his head. He waited, breathing slow, then stepped out and fired. The shot grazed Briggs's arm, spinning him in the saddle. His horse screamed and threw him off, crashing into the dust. The battle raged around them. But in that moment the world narrowed to just two men, one broken by cruelty, the other shaped by conscience. Cole advanced through the smoke, rifle lowered but ready. Briggs staggered to his feet, blood soaking his sleeve, eyes burning with hate. He reached for his gun, but before he could lift it, a sudden shadow crossed the ground. An arrow struck him square in the chest. He froze, staring down at the shaft protruding from his vest. Behind Cole, Nayeli stood on the ridge, bow still raised, her face calm, her aim steady. The echo of her shot lingered in the air like a ghost. Briggs fell backward into the dust, his eyes wide, the desert sun blazing above him. The last of his men turned and fled, scattering across the plains. The battle was over. Silence returned slowly, carried on the wind like a sigh. Smoke drifted upward, mingling with the light. The Apache emerged from their hiding places, weary but victorious. Cole stood where he was, breathing hard, the sound of his pulse mixing with the last fading drumbeats. Nayeli approached him, her steps measured, her eyes unreadable. She looked down at Briggs's still body, then to Cole. The war had ended, but something deeper had begun. As the sun climbed higher, the Apache gathered their dead and the fallen enemies. Ritual chants rose into the air, soft and solemn. Cole helped where he could, though he felt like a stranger among them still. He had fought beside them, but he did not belong here. That night, when the fires were lit again and the valley filled with the low hum of song, Cole stood apart, looking toward the open desert. His path was uncertain. His past was gone. And yet, when Nayeli walked to stand beside him, silent as the stars above, he knew that somehow their destinies had been tied together by the same force that moved the drums, the wind, and the desert itself. Far beyond the canyon, lightning flashed on the horizon. A coming storm. Cole knew their story wasn't over. The desert had claimed one man's blood. It would soon demand more. The desert was quiet after the battle. Too quiet, like the earth itself was holding its breath. The smoke had long drifted away, leaving only the faint scent of ash and the stillness that follows bloodshed. The sun hung low over the canyons, casting long shadows across the stones where so many men had fallen. Cole Danner stood at the edge of the valley, his boots sinking into the soft red dust. His rifle was slung across his back, and his hat rested in his hand. The wind whispered through the cliffs, tugging at the torn edge of his coat. The battle was done, but peace had not come. Not truly. He looked out over the land, endless, vast, and untamed. The Apache had won their ground, but victory in the West was never final. He knew it. Nayeli's father knew it. The men who rode for vengeance would return. Maybe not tomorrow, maybe not next month, but someday. The white man's greed for land and gold never slept. Cole had become something he never planned to be, a defender of a people not his own. Yet the moment he'd raised his gun against Briggs's men, he'd made his choice. There was no going back to ranch life or card games or drifting through saloons. The desert had claimed him now, same as it claimed everyone who stayed too long under its sun. The Apache moved quietly through the valley, burying their dead, singing their songs to the sky. They lit small fires and burned offerings of cedar and sage, sending the smoke upward as a bridge between the living and the spirits. Cole helped where he could, though he spoke little. He felt the weight of every grave. When night came, the stars filled the sky, cold and endless, scattered like shards of silver. The camp was silent except for the crackle of fire and the soft hum of prayer. Nayeli sat by her father's side, her eyes fixed on the flames. The old chief's face was calm but lined with sorrow. Too many of his people had fallen. Too many years had been spent fighting a war that would never end. Cole knew what the chief would ask before he spoke a word. The Apache had their victory, but their safety would not last. Word of the battle would spread, and soldiers would come next. Not bounty hunters or ranch hands this time, but the U.S. cavalry, armed with cannons and orders. The valley would not survive that kind of wrath. Cole couldn't stay, and yet the thought of leaving felt like tearing something out of himself. Before dawn he saddled his horse and rode to the ridge overlooking the valley. The horizon was dark with thunderclouds, lightning flickering deep within them. A storm was coming from the west, slow but certain. He watched the flashes roll across the sky, knowing they mirrored the storm inside him. Below, Nayeli appeared on horseback, riding silently through the mist. She stopped beside him without a word, her face calm in the dim light. She didn't ask him to stay, and he didn't promise to return. Some things didn't need words. They rode together along the ridge until the sun began to rise, a blood-red dawn that painted the desert in fire. Behind them, the valley lay hidden in shadow. Ahead, the open land stretched forever. As the storm crept closer, they found shelter in an old abandoned mission half buried by sand. The roof had caved in long ago, and the wooden beams stood like ribs of a dying animal. Inside, the air was heavy with the smell of dust and forgotten prayers. Cole built a small fire and stared into it, lost in thought. He could hear the rain beginning to fall outside, slow at first, then harder. The wind howled through the cracks, rattling the old church bell above. He thought of the bottles on that fence, the foolish challenge that had started everything. He could still see Briggs's smirk, the crowd's laughter, the ring of his bullets hitting glass one by one. Back then it had seemed like a game. Now it felt like a curse. That contest had drawn a line between pride and consequence, and he'd crossed it without knowing. The storm broke hard, roaring across the desert like a beast unleashed. Rain hammered the roof, thunder rolled through the canyons, and flashes of lightning turned the night to day. The desert came alive in chaos, as if the heavens themselves had decided to wash away the blood. When the rain eased at last, the fire was little more than embers. The dawn that followed was gray and cold. Cole stepped outside and looked toward the horizon. The air was clean, the dust washed away. He knew what had to come next. He would ride east, away from the valley, drawing the army's attention toward him. The Apache would move deeper into the mountains, beyond the reach of the soldiers. It was the only way. Nayeli followed him to where his horse stood saddled. Her hair was damp from the rain, her eyes reflecting the soft light of morning. She placed something in his hand, a small silver charm shaped like an eagle's feather. It was worn smooth from years of touch. He closed his fist around it. The moment stretched between them, silent, infinite. Then, with a final glance, he mounted his horse and turned toward the open plains. The wind rose again as he rode, tugging at his coat, carrying the scent of wet earth and sage. Each hoofbeat echoed like a drum across the empty land. Behind him, the sun rose higher, and the valley disappeared into the haze. He didn't look back. Some stories weren't meant to be relived, only remembered. Days later, soldiers would find his trail, one man against the horizon, leading them farther and farther away. They would never reach the valley. The Apache would vanish into the mountains like ghosts, their songs fading into legend, and somewhere beyond the desert storms, Cole Danner would keep riding. The outlaw, who'd once taken a challenge for sport and ended up giving everything for love and honor. The people who told his story would change the details, as stories often do. Some would say he died fighting in the storm. Others claimed he lived out his days in a distant land, never speaking of the girl or the valley again. But those who knew, the few who remembered the rhythm of the drums, the flash of lightning on red earth, and the whisper of feathers in the wind, they said he never truly left. They said his spirit still rides whenever thunder rolls over the desert, chasing the ghosts of the past beneath the burning sky. Because in the Wild West, legends never die. They just keep riding.